The second I say the word Astros, half the room, probably more than half the room, emotionally leaves. And that fascinates me because every time I speak about the Houston Astros on stage, online, or even casually in conversation, I can literally feel the emotional pendulum activate in people immediately. Here's what they say: they cheated. That's a scandal. They stole signs. I've even been introduced on stage as a rival. I am not a rival. I'm just loyal. But what's fascinating to me is people stop listening to the message that I'm trying to share just because I say the word Astros. It's like the nervous system locks onto one emotional headline and completely loses the larger conversation. And that right there is actually what this episode is all about. Welcome to the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast. My name is Kathie Owen, and I study human patterns under pressure, the invisible, emotional, behavioral, and nervous system dynamics that affect leadership, communication, trust, performance, and organizational durability. And today, I want to talk about baseball. Whether you know the sport or not, whether you like the Astros or not, because today, I'm not talking from the perspective most people watch baseball, because I don't watch baseball like most people. I never have. I've loved the game since I was a kid, but I don't primarily watch for stats. I don't watch to argue online. I don't watch to emotionally attach my identity to wins and losses. I watch humans under pressure. That's what fascinates me. Baseball is one of the greatest psychological mirrors that exist because baseball exposes tension immediately. A tiny hesitation changes everything. A tiny loss of confidence changes everything. A nervous system that no longer feels safe changes everything. And once you start studying human behavior deeply, you realize baseball has almost nothing to do with baseball, and it has everything to do with humans. Now, before I go any further, I want to explain something because I reference this often in my work. I talk a lot about reality transurfing. Reality Transurfing is a book series by Vadim Zeland. He's a Russian quantum physicist. And this book deeply impacted the way I view emotional systems, organizational energy, and collective behavior. One of the concepts inside reality transurfing is the idea of pendulums. A pendulum is basically a collective emotional structure. It feeds on emotional energy. And sports are one of the strongest pendulums on earth. Politics are another. Social media, yep, it's another one. Corporate gossip, there's another one. The second people emotionally react together, a pendulum forms. And once that pendulum forms, it wants attention. It wants outrage. It wants emotional attachment. It wants people choosing sides. And the Astros cheating scandal is one of the strongest sports pendulums I've seen in years. Now, here's where people get reactive when I say this. Yes, the Astros got caught stealing signs. But if you know baseball, you also know sign stealing has existed forever. Baseball has been trying to gain competitive advantage since the beginning of the game. That's not new. And here's the part people conveniently skip over because the pendulum is more emotionally satisfying than this very nuance. You still have to hit a baseball traveling over 90 miles an hour. That part matters a lot, even if you know the sign or the pitch is coming. Because what fascinates me is not whether people are angry. What fascinates me is how emotionally attached people become to narratives. And once people emotionally attach to a narrative, they stop observing reality clearly. That's true in sports. That's true in corporations. That's true in politics. That's true in relationships. And I see this happen constantly when I speak publicly about the Astros. People hear Astros, and suddenly they're no longer listening to the actual lesson. That fascinates me as somebody who studies psychological safety, because psychological safety is actually one of the deepest layers of my work. And psychological safety is wildly misunderstood. People think psychological safety means everybody feels comfortable. Nope, that's not it. Psychological safety means people can remain open, observant, thoughtful, and communicative, even when emotionally activated. And that is very different. And most people lose that immediately once emotional identity gets triggered. That's what pendulums do. Pendulums narrow perception. They reduce nuance. They collapse complexity into emotional certainty. And sports fandom does this constantly. Now, let's bring this back to baseball itself. What I'm seeing in Major League Baseball right now, especially with the Astros, is not just a baseball story. It's human performance under pressure story. Astros don't look untalented. They look burdened, and that is different. I've heard reports that we have the most injuries of a team ever in history of professional baseball. And injuries are fascinating to me because I don't think injuries are just physical. That doesn't mean injuries are imagined. That's not what I'm saying. But the body and the nervous system are connected, deeply connected. Pressure affects recovery. Stress affects sleep. Emotional tension affects mechanics. Hypervigilance affects fluidity. And baseball is one of the most timing dependent sports on earth. Milliseconds matter. Breathing matters. Rhythm matters. Confidence matters. Flow. Oh my gosh, flow matters. Now add years of physical playoff intensity, trade speculation, aging players, media pressure, fan pressure, constant criticism, social media, and the emotional residue of carrying dynasty expectations for nearly a decade. That changes humans. And I think people underestimate how exhausting sustained pressure becomes over time, especially when every season becomes World Series or failure. That's heavy. Now, compare that to lower pressure teams right now. The Athletics are fascinating to me because they're operating in almost the opposite emotional environment. Lower expectations, less spotlight, less emotional weight, and oddly enough, shared adversity can create bonding. Humans often perform differently when they emotionally feel we have nothing to lose. That creates looseness, that creates flow, and baseball punishes tightness immediately. And here's something I'm actually going to do an entire episode on because it fascinates me psychologically. When you watch the Astros closely, you can see completely different nervous system responses to pressure in different ways. Take Jose Altuve versus Framber Valdez, and you don't need to know either athlete or either team they play for right now, this very moment, to understand what I'm about to explain. Altuve has spent years being booed in opposing stadiums because of the cheating scandal. And now, somehow, he still remains incredibly emotionally steady and high performing under pressure. I love watching him play under pressure. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, you can visibly see Framber emotionally unravel on the mound when frustration hits him. He actually threw a pitch at his catcher because he was angry at the pitch call. That's insane. And that is obviously a human who is not emotionally regulating on the mound and on national television. In fact, that happened last year. This season, He actually gave up several runs in an inning and back to back to back, and he was thrown out of the game because he hit a batter. That is a human who cannot handle pressure, and it's obvious. So the contrast between Altuve and Framber tells us something really important about leadership, emotional regulation, and human performance under pressure, not just in baseball, in life. Now, another thing I really want to mention, because almost nobody talks about this, is the pressure on the broadcasters. I have so much respect for Julia Morales, Todd Callis, and Jeff Blum right now. If you don't know who they are, that doesn't even matter. Just know that they announce for the Houston Astros. And Julia is also very active on social media, and she takes a lot of backslash for the Astros. And she's been with the Houston Astros since 2013. So she has seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and a lot more ugly than the good or even the bad. But people forget when they're watching the game. These announcers are navigating the emotional pendulum too. Every game is scrutinized. Every loss becomes emotional online. Every managerial decision gets criticized. Every injury, and there are so many of them this season, becomes a storyline. And yet, night after night, these announcers still show steadiness. They show professionalism. They show humor. And I want to add, humor is one of the best ways to break a pendulum. And I will be doing an episode on that very soon. But they also add presence. I talk about presence all the time. They also add leadership. And all of that matters, especially inside emotionally charged systems. And honestly, these people often become emotional stabilizers, whether they realize it or not. And that's where my work lives. Organizations always have emotional stabilizers. Sometimes it's leadership. Sometimes it's a manager. Sometimes it's an assistant. Sometimes it's the communicator. Sometimes it's your wellness director. Sometimes it's your consultant. And sometimes it's the person who helps regulate the emotional atmosphere when everyone else becomes reactive. That is leadership under pressure. Now, the reason this topic matters so deeply to me because I've been studying these dynamics for decades. And if you watched my recent episode about the Enron scandal era in Houston and my connection to that world, then you already know this perspective did not come out of nowhere. And I will link that episode in the show notes and description below so you can check that out. And actually, I write a blog post for every episode I do, and I include it in the show notes and description below. And those blog posts include bonus resources and more detail that I go into it. They also have the podcast episode, they have the video. You can check that out by looking in the show notes and description below. But that Enron scandal era and my experience with it, that period of time shaped me profoundly. I've watched organizational pressure. I've watched silence. I've watched emotional contagion. I watch fear. I watch perception management. I watch whistleblower dynamics. Watching what humans do when systems become emotionally charged, that changed the way I see organizations forever. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to be diving much deeper into this. I will be talking about blue-collar industries, private equity, organizational pressure, psychological safety. That one is in almost every episode I talk about. Human behavior under stress, and the invisible patterns most people completely miss. Because I believe we are entering an era where understanding humans matter more than ever. Not just data, not just metrics, not just surface level performance, humans, nervous systems, emotional environments, trust, fear, pressure, identity. And what fascinates me is sports may be one of the most clearest mirrors we have for all of it. So if this perspective resonates with you, please like this video. It tells YouTube that this content matters. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another episode. And please share this episode with someone that may benefit from hearing it. Not because I'm trying to build some massive audience, because I'm not. I'm trying to have conversations that I genuinely believe need to happen right now. Because humans are overwhelmed. Organizations are overwhelmed. Leaders are overwhelmed. And most people are trying to solve deeply human problems without understanding humans. That's the disconnect. And that disconnect is exactly what I study. So with that, thank you for being here. I trust that you found today's episode helpful, and I will see you in the next episode of the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast.